The next person I'm welcoming to the stage is Mr. Jim Hopf, dedicated climate advocate with his work with Citizens Climate Lobby for a carbon fee and dividend. But he's also a very dedicated nuclear advocate and has been working with me on our government team for, 6 years now. We've had a lot of meetings with legislators. We've been able to make the case to legislators, legislative staff, testifying, in large part because of his work. So he's going to walk us through how to have a productive legislative visit. And so thanks so much, Jim. Floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Eric. As Eric mentioned, I'm a longtime member of Citizens Climate Lobby. It's a climate carbon pricing organization, very large, grassroots, and they're very focused on lobbying, as their name suggests. They lobby regularly, like for instance, twice a year we descend on Washington, hundreds of people, as you might see us on the Capitol steps, and lobby like most of the congressional offices. So they have a lot of lobbying experience, and a lot of my guidance here today is actually based on CCL lobbying training. I'm also a member of the government team of Generation Atomic. That team's prime focus is interacting with legislators, including lobbying. And then finally, another group, these groups that I've been with, I've been involved with the Illinois effort to save those plants, the effort to save Palisades, the effort to save Diablo Canyon. And we were victorious in at least two of them, and believe it or not, we kind of wrote it off for dead, but it's starting to look like even Palisades might stay open. So our efforts have been 3 for 3. And once again, these efforts to save the plants, once again involved a lot of lobbying and interacting with legislators. Okay, before I get into the details of how to run a lobby meeting, kind of the intricate details, I'm going to talk about some general principles. I have to say that a lot of the stuff I wrote down has been talked about several times in today's conference already, so some of it might sound familiar. You may have heard of an old adage, you'll attract more bees with honey than vinegar. You'll do better with being positive. So yeah, to that end, you should always be respectful when you have these meetings. Be friendly, express appreciation for the great work, that the legislator has done. Let's let other groups be antagonistic or, criticize the legislators. If you come in as the good cop, you'll find that you can make some real progress. Never argue or try to change their values. You've heard that several times today. You're never going to change their core beliefs or fundamental values. And if you do change their position at all, it's going to be kind of slowly and carefully over time, incrementally. It's really not a debate. I've heard this also said today. Frankly, it's kind of more of a sales pitch. This isn't a debate you're trying to win. You're trying to sell this person on what you're advocating for, and it's based on who they are. Like, imagine a salesman getting into a heated argument, with a potential customer. That sale's never going to go through. Salesmen know that'll never work. So. And the same applies for us. Instead, you might have heard this before today, you need to learn about them, listen to them, and try to find common values. And then after you learned about where they're coming from, you tailor your message accordingly to be maximally effective with that person. You've also heard this before, you try to find reasons why that person would want to support, what you're asking for. In other words, you're not trying to change their point of view. You're not trying to change their values. Why would this person, being as they are, want to support, what I'm asking for? Another thing you should avoid is lecturing or kind of a one-way conversation in general. Let's say you have a bunch of arguments or a presentation ready, and you're going to talk their ear off, for 15 or 30 minutes. That's actually not going to be as productive as you'd like. Instead, you want to set up a two-way conversation. You're going to start by asking questions. Ideally, CCL had this metric. If you shouldn't be talking more than 50% of the time. At least 50% of the time, you're listening to them. Also, another thing, especially with your early lobby meetings, it can be more about just building a relationship with the person, the congressperson, as opposed to what you're actually specifically there, that day. I have a great example. Alan Metzger was actually tremendously successful with his local legislator. He's a constituent. Over time, with a lot of patience, he developed a strong relationship with that legislator. And now the legislators actually might be coming forward with legislation that Alan actually suggested to him. So instead of merely supporting legislation you like, you might even be able to influence legislation that's actually comes out. And again, that's a product of a long-term effort to develop a strong relationship. All the professional lobbyists will tell you that. It's all about the relationship. Okay. Another general principle, something you might have heard, the first rule of communication is to know your audience. You have to tailor your message to the audience to be effective. An argument that would work with one person very much wouldn't work with another. So you need to find that out about the legislator and their office before you go in. And there are two main ways to do that. I believe this has been mentioned before by others. You need to do a lot of research, before you show up at the meeting. There are several things you can do. You can look up what committee assignments is the legislator on. That kind of shows you what his area of interest is. Like for us, ideally, we're nuclear, that's our thing. If they're on an energy or climate committee, that would be a piece of good news because they're more likely to be interested in what we're talking about. And also, frankly, they'll be more influential. If you manage to get this guy on the Senate, energy or climate committee, they will be more influential. Also, you can research their position on past bills. Obviously, that'll let you know kind of where they stand on various issues, including hopefully, nuclear-related issues, what you're going to go in about. You can get a sense of where they're at. Their personal background might provide some insights. Also, congressional offices, they put out press releases about something they've done or something they support or oppose, bills that they support. That's obviously information you can get that'll give you a better idea of where they're at. And finally, there's social media. A lot of the offices nowadays have a presence on Facebook and Twitter. And they like to tweet about, again, things that they're doing, things that they support, things that they oppose. It's another great source of information about, the positions and views of the person you're going to be talking to. A second way to gather information is to use questions. In CCL, we call it an open-ended question. You kind of lead with these questions, so you don't talk first. You ask questions first. You carefully listen to their response, and that can maybe give you more details about their views on the things that you're going to want to talk about in the future. That allows you to kind of right in the meeting, maybe adjust your message somewhat, to be even more effective. Here's an example of an open-ended question. It's very generic. It's like you might ask the congressman or person, what are your thoughts about nuclear in general? What are your general concerns? What are your thoughts? Could you share that with us? And you might want to listen to them for a while, okay? Okay, here's an example of a legislator you're going to meet with, and you've done your previous research. And what did your research show? Well, what committees are they on? Well, it turns out, fortunately, he's on the Energy and Water and Appropriations committees. So he has an interest in energy and climate stuff, and by extension, nuclear stuff. He could be influential if you got him on your side. But the most important thing that your research uncovered here is this second thing here. He sponsored 100% renewable energy by 2050 legislation. Okay, so that's a big thing. So what does that tell you? It means that he's very supportive and enthusiastic about renewables. So what do you do with that piece of information? Well, first of all, you would never say anything at all negative about renewable energy, because that'll just immediately turn him off, and he'll kind of, take a defensive position. He won't be accepting of what you're going to say later. Also, let's say you wanted to talk to him about, I don't know, thorium reactors or whatever. You had all these arguments, or almost like a presentation of all the merits, of this nuclear thing that you're trying to get support for. In this case, with this guy, before you do any of that, you're going to have to carefully and gently sell him on the idea that nuclear is going to need to play some role. After all, he supported 100% renewables, right, by 2050. You might try to argue, well, the IPCC says, or a lot of the experts, there's growing consensus that clean, firm generation like nuclear is going to need to play some role. And hopefully, if you're successful at kind of gently moving him towards accepting that nuclear is going to need to play some role, that presentation you had planned, he will only be receptive to that after you've done that. Okay, now getting kind of more into setting up meetings. Obviously, the first thing you have to do is get an appointment for a meeting. You do that by contacting the legislative office by phone or email. When they answer the phone, one of the first things you might want to ask to speak with a key staffer, say a climate or energy staffer. And that's for two reasons. First of all, the staffer is probably more interested in, your nuclear thing, that you want to talk about, versus, the person who answers the phone, they might be kind of like a secretarial type person. And furthermore, if you convince that staffer to schedule a meeting, he has more pull in the office, than the person who answered the phone. Another thing to do before the meeting, you want to gather up all the supporting materials that you might bring, have, like information, data, arguments. These are things you might refer to in the meeting itself, but more probably it's something that you'll be able to leave behind in their office. You want to leave them behind informational materials before you walk out the door so they can look at it later. I'll be honest with you, from my experience in lobbying, don't be disappointed if you don't get a meeting with the legislator themselves. It actually very rarely happens. I've been on many, many lobby meetings, and it's only like once or twice we actually got to speak with the legislator. They're very busy. Most of the time you're going to meet with a staffer, hopefully a key staffer, like an energy staffer. But there's actually some good news here. Believe it or not, talking to the staffer can actually be more influential than talking to the legislator, because the legislator has to cover all issues. They're very busy. The key staffer, they're actually the person who's primarily responsible for developing the position on energy issue, climate issue, or nuclear power. Let's say they're the ones who are spending more time on that issue, and they're the ones who are developing the legislative office's position. I mean, of course they talk to the legislator, but they're actually spending more time on that. So that person can actually be more influential. Okay, now we're going to get down to some of the details of running a good lobby meeting. So there you are, you've done all your pre-work, and you're showing up in their office for your meeting at the beginning. The first thing you do when you come in the door, and this slide did not appear. Oh boy. Okay. This slide did not appear. It's hidden or something. Okay, I want to say there are some roles you need to establish before you go into the meeting within your group. Like, let's say you have 3 or 4 people. You want to have a leader, a storyteller, a timekeeper, and a note taker. Okay, and what the leader does is they're kind of the leader of the meeting. They'll make the main ask, and they'll kind of guide you through the steps of the meeting. The storyteller, you've heard about that today already. They're a person who connects with the legislator by making it, telling a story why this is not just academic or abstract, it's actually having an impact on real people's lives. As one example, Alyssa, another member of our government team, she grew up in the area around the Zion plant, and she often tells the story of how her family and her community was negatively impacted by this economic devastation of the plant's closure. So let's say you're trying to make a case for keeping existing nuclear plants open. A personal story like that is going to be really effective and powerful. The note taker, they take down what you said, and more importantly, what the legislator and their staff said, because you're interested in that, what they said. And also, he writes down any commitments you made at the meeting. Like at the meeting, the most common example is, let's say they ask you a question, you don't know the answer, but you say, but we will look into that, we'll research that, and we'll get back to you. So, the note taker makes sure that we remember that commitment by writing it down. The timekeeper, they take note of how much time you have. They kind of monitor the meeting, make sure that it's flowing along at a pace where, you'll finish in time. They might, kind of like our people we have today, they might raise their hand and say, we only have 5 minutes left, let's please finish it up. Sorry. So you've arrived at the meeting. The first thing that happens is that the leader will thank the office, for taking the time to meet with you, and he'll ask, how much time do you have? Usually it's like 30 minutes, sometimes it's 15 minutes. It's very rarely over 30 minutes, okay? And then the next thing that happens is that usually the leader, they will express appreciation for something that the legislator has done in the past. Like an example would be, we wanted to thank you for supporting Bill X, or for your leadership on issue Y, like whether it's climate or energy. Ideally, they will have supported something nuclear related, but maybe at the least climate or energy related. But frankly, sometimes they didn't have anything to appreciate. If it's not energy, climate, or nuclear related, you couldn't find anything. You have to just dream up something else that you appreciated the work you've done. Like we appreciate the work you've done for veterans, or something like that. To be real honest, this is just kind of an effort to get on their good side. So then comes the introduction phase. Like oftentimes the leader will start. Each one of your group does a brief introduction. Usually it's simply your name, maybe where you live, maybe like a brief background, like a statement like, I'm a retired nuclear engineer. By the way, I am. And also, why is this issue important to you? I care about this issue because of that. But keep in mind, it's only like a few sentences. And generally, the storyteller goes last. You let them close with their powerful personal story of who they are and why they care about the issue. After that's done, the leader will state the purpose of the meeting. You do have to tell them that, like, why are you here? Well, I'm here because I'm hoping to get your support for this bill, or perhaps for some more general cause, like to get your support to do whatever is necessary to keep existing nuclear plants open. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bill. Okay. So after the early part of the meeting's done, we move on to the main part of the meeting, kind of the main discussion. That's going to be where all of the members of your group get to participate in a discussion, and all the people on their side are on the discussion. Usually the leader will make an opening statement. Like, let's say you're there to get support for a bill. He might say, do you have any questions about the bill or concerns about the bill that would prevent you from voting for it? That's kind of an example of one of those open-ended questions. And then what you do, again, is you listen to them talk for a while before you start to speak. Again, listen first, listen a lot. Don't lecture. You want a two-way conversation. When you're listening to what they say, again, you're further dialing in, you're identifying their concern, more details about their value and point of view. And then you try to find shared values. Again, I've stated this before, as have others. Find a reason why that person or that legislator would want to support what you're asking for, as opposed to trying to change their values or position. Like, let me give an example. This might be kind of a difficult situation. You have a highly progressive legislator that's deeply concerned about environmental justice issues, okay? Historically, that's kind of been a group that hasn't been too supportive of nuclear. So what are you going to say? What argument can you give that they might connect with, right? Well, it turns out, if we build more nuclear or keep more nuclear, that'll reduce the use of fossil power generation, much of which takes the form of these old, dirty fossil plants that are sited in poor, disadvantaged neighborhoods. That's a kind of argument that you can attempt. And that might resonate with them, because that's what they're concerned about. They're concerned about pollution in these neighborhoods. After there's been a lot of back and forth, the leader or someone might, after you've spoken, you listened to them, then you gave them a response, you should follow up by saying, does that answer your question or concern? Did you have any further concerns, that I need to further elaborate on? And then finally, after, kind of at the end of the discussion, the leader will probably say, generically, is there anything we haven't discussed? Are there any other concerns or questions you have that we could maybe help you with? And after that kind of final follow-up's over, then he ends by saying, the leader, he says, so we've talked about it for a while. Do you think that it would be possible for you to support the bill? Okay, I'm going to have one slide here about some example questions, anticipated questions, and things that arguments you might be able to give in response. Okay, the first example is, let's say you have a renewables enthusiast. It's like, well, why do we need to pursue nuclear when, renewables can probably do it all and they're more environmentally sound, and I've heard that they're less expensive. What would you do in that situation? Couple of suggested answers. First of all, don't say anything negative about renewables, okay? Instead say, we understand that renewables are great, they're going to play a major role, but we're concerned. We don't want them to be used to replace nuclear, another non-emitting source. We want them to be used to replace fossil fuel. So we actually make progress, reducing pollution, reducing climate change. I have actually found that such arguments are well received by people who are pro-renewables, okay? So that's a good argument. It's especially a good argument if you're trying to keep existing nuclear plants open, that kind of treading water by replacing nuclear with renewables. Another thing you could say, in that example I gave earlier about, gently trying to tell them why nuclear having some role is going to be needed. The IPCC says so, these analysts are saying so. You acknowledge that renewables are going to play a major role, but we're going to need at least some clean, firm generation like nuclear. You have to be careful, but that argument could maybe, work in that situation. What if you have a climate skeptic, like a conservative Republican? Well, what you should do, probably pretty clearly, is steer away from climate arguments and perhaps environmental arguments in general. Instead, emphasize other benefits of nuclear, high-paying jobs, a large number of jobs, huge contributions to the local tax base, enhancing grid reliability, and maybe reducing power costs. And there's actually one that would work great with the Republicans that I forgot to list here, the whole geopolitical thing. China and Russia are taking over leadership of the world nuclear industry. We need to get our act together so we can be relevant again. With a lot of conservatives, that will really be a powerful argument as well. Here's a final person. They're concerned about cost. Now, this is going to be a common thing because, as you know, there's a powerful narrative right now that nuclear is very expensive. It's too expensive, and there are other cheaper alternatives. So it's kind of a difficult situation. What would you say, maybe? You might say that, we're not asking for a kind of fiat decision to choose nuclear, or we're not necessarily saying nuclear is going to be the dominant source. All we're saying is that because nuclear is clean, just like renewables, it should be given similar support, and it should be given a chance to compete on a fair level playing field. And then the market will decide. And you know what? If nuclear turns out to be totally uncompetitive, the market will decide against it. Another argument you could make, this is the one I've mentioned several times before, renewables might be cheap at low penetration levels, but there's growing consensus that you're not going to be able to get all your energy from that. Again, you're going to need some firm, clean sources like nuclear. The main reason being that okay, it's on again. Okay. Yes. Okay. So, the argument is that analyses are showing that if you tried to get all of your power from intermittent sources, the storage costs are astronomical. Okay. And the inclusion of new nuclear, even if it's somewhat expensive, it will reduce the storage requirements so much that experts are saying that it will reduce overall power system costs, assuming a non-carbon grid. So, these are some of the arguments you might be able to say in response to that. Okay, finally now we've made it to the meeting end. The main discussion has concluded. At this point, the leader might make a secondary ask, like for an example, let's say, we couldn't get your support for the bill. We're trying to get you to support. You might say, are there any amendments that could be made to the bill that might make you reconsider and it might be possible for you to support it? Another example of a secondary ask would be bringing up other similar nuclear-related bills. Okay, you didn't support this one, but maybe is there a chance you might support this bill or this bill? And then there's kind of a catch-all secondary ask is that, but would you be willing to meet with us in the future and continue our conversation? Can we at least get another meeting? They usually say yes to that. I mentioned the leave-behinds earlier. These are informational articles, op-eds, info sheets, various reports, expressions of support by other legislators or important organizations. These are informational things that you want to leave behind before you leave. Be sure to gather them up and remember to do so. Ask them if you'd like to take a photo. A lot of us like to do that. We can maybe use it on our social media, accounts of our lobby meeting. And then finally, of course, thank them for taking the time to meet with you. At CCL, we actually leave like a little greeting card, a thank you card with the office before we leave. But barring that, at an absolute minimum, you have to email the office back within a week or so, to express your thanks for them taking the time to meet.
I'll be playing the legislator in this simulation here, and Alyssa, being a very experienced citizen lobbyist, will be playing the lobbyist here.
So we're going to kind of do brief versions of these, and we're going to do two of them. So the beginning might look something along the lines of introductions, and you're starting as the Republican. Mm-hmm. Okay, so thank you so much for that legislation that you introduced, particularly to limit the imports from China. Obviously, we want to see more domestic production in the United States. So thank you so much for doing that. And then maybe I tell some kind of personal story about the economic impacts of Zion. That tends to go really, really well for Republicans. Maybe I give some facts about how maybe we're trying to lift the moratorium in Minnesota. And so
we can do that. We don't have to hypothetically, if you want to.
Well, then it would take a long time. So
that's okay. We got about 10 minutes for this, so it's okay.
We're doing 5 for each. I kind of want to get to the Q&A.
Okay. All right.
So maybe like, you do the whole meeting. It takes a full 5 minutes to tell the story, give all the facts, and we say, all right, so if I'm the leader of the meeting, so thank you so much for listening to us, and we want to know if you would be willing to support, a piece of legislation that would lift the moratorium on new nuclear construction in the state of Minnesota.
Well, for my record, I've been supporting that for almost 10 years, but you gotta talk to the Democrats who won't even give it a hearing. So you got me on board, but of course, all they want to do is virtue signal about solar and wind and all of that. So go take it up with them.
No, we definitely hear you. It's where as the Democrats really want to make these pushes to supposedly decarbonize, and they want to support wind and solar. You and I both know there's so many problems with wind and solar. They're unreliable. California's showing it. Germany's showing it. We have to lift this moratorium so that way we can start, doing the real decarbonization work that the Democrats supposedly want. So if they're going to shut down some coal and natural gas plants anyway, might as well replace them with something, a little bit more reliable.
Yeah, but the Sherco generating, the coal plant we got up in Sherburne County, that's got plenty of good years left in it. I think we can keep running that till at least 2035.
Yeah, and 2035 gives us plenty of time for some of these new up-and-coming nuclear companies to get their reactors certified through the NRC and to start some of the construction, because it takes a long time, unfortunately, right now, for the NRC to review some of these new designs. So, 2035, it seems like it's a ways away, but that would be now the perfect time to lift the moratorium and give the communities a chance.
Is this gonna, you look at what's happening in Georgia. I don't want to be known as the guy who wastes all of our money on a power plant that goes overtime, over budget. So how do I know this isn't going to be a big boondoggle?
Now, that's a great question. Vogtle and BC Summer are both AP 1000s. AP 1000s were never going to be successful in the United States. Vogtle went $25 billion over budget. You think the new reactors that we're going to build in Minnesota are going to be AP 1000s? They are not. They're going to be sleek, new nuclear companies.
Well, I guess you gotta tell that to the Polish. I think they're thinking ordering some of those. But we'll see. I guess it'd be nice to have a few more options.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for your time. So, when you're talking to Republicans, you can go ahead and bash renewables. They'll eat that up. It's kind of fun to do. It's cleansing for the soul. I love talking to Republicans.
All right, this one will look a bit different than that last meeting. Thanks so much for meeting with me today. I don't know a ton about the nuclear industry. Nuke plants. I know we have a couple in our state, but it's kind of an older technology, and it seems like with all the advances in wind and solar, they're just the cheapest thing ever. So I don't know why we would look to the past for technology.
Yeah, so real quick, before we kind of jump into things, I do want to say thank you so much for your huge, impactful support on the initiatives to go carbon-free in the electric grid by 2050. That's huge, and I just really want to make it known that we commend you for that. That's we all want to decarbonize the grid.
Well, I appreciate that. I know we got to leave a better future for our kids and our grandkids, and we just don't have any time to waste.
Yeah, no, of course. I do want to address, some of what you were discussing earlier about, some of why don't we build wind and solar? It's super cheap. I come from an environmental justice kind of community where a lot of the times we don't really get a say in what's being built. And so sometimes people, I think it's important to look at consent-based siting, right? Let the communities decide which type of energy they want to have for themselves. And so we're not even asking you to even build a new nuclear plant. We're not asking you to pass legislation that funds them or gives them money. All we're asking is to give the communities, the opportunity to decide for themselves by lifting the moratorium.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. With the Prairie Island Indian band down in southeastern Minnesota here, and the issues they've had with the nuclear waste, it just seems like we're not treating them with the respect they deserve by lifting this moratorium.
No, and you're absolutely right. I agree with you. So, for instance, the community that I come from currently has no nuclear plant, so they're not really benefiting from the benefits of nuclear. But Zion in Lake County, Illinois, does house nuclear waste there. And the community that lives there, you're right, did not consent to have that waste stay there for so long. But the thing is, that's something that the United States Department of Energy is really focusing on right now. There have been multiple pushes, requests for information, webinars by the Office of Nuclear Energy Secretary Katie Huff and Samuel Brinton about how we can address that so that way we can move forward and make sure that we're rewarding communities that want to house waste and that we transport it away from communities that don't want to have it. So we absolutely agree with you, and we see those things as something that's possible even if we're building new nuclear.
But what are you going to do with the waste, though? I mean, there's no safe way to dispose of it for, 10, 20 million years?
And this is where I would go on some mini discussion about how deep geological repositories work, and talk about how perhaps Sweden and Finland are building these types of facilities. And so,
well, that's really interesting information. Thank you. I'll have to look into that a little bit.
Yeah, no, we'd be happy to provide you with some more information about that, especially if that's something you're concerned about. Actually, would you be interested, perhaps in, or if you're the staffer, do you think that the legislator would be interested in doing a tour of an ISFAC or a facility that houses nuclear waste?
I'm sorry, the ISFAC what?
So ISFAC stands for Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation. Thank you, I forgot the second S. And so, I'd be happy to get in contact with some of the folks down at Prairie Island, perhaps, and maybe we can try to set something up. I think it would be a great opportunity.
Well, that would be pretty interesting to see what kind of operation they're running down there. Well, I'll tell you what, I think lifting that moratorium is going to be a heavy lift, but I'll tell you what, there has been some conversation about doing a study on lifting the moratorium and maybe advanced nuclear and those kind of reactors that can recycle nuclear waste. So, we can look into that.
Yeah, and the other states are looking into those types of things too, right? Colorado was considering spending money to do a study on, well, what happens if we did build new nuclear in our state, and how would that benefit our state? I think all of those things are worth it, right? We should have as much information as possible on this issue. So thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us.
Yeah, appreciate you teaching me about this. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You do want to try to stay in touch with the person when you're done, and you probably should invite them to your facilities, if you have facilities, and if you don't, to make connections with things like the nearest nuclear power plant or the nearest national lab. And if you can set up tours with some of these influential people, we should be doing more of that. And we're not, the whole nuclear industry is just kind of ignoring that potential for advocacy right now. So,
couple components of that interaction that I want to highlight. You probably noticed that Alyssa referenced legislation that I had supported, or that I had put forward that she liked, and that's a really good way to let the legislator know that you did your homework and that this meeting is really important to you and you're taking it very seriously. That you know that about them, and everybody likes a compliment, So that was very good, and clearly, messaging it to different political parties, responding to some of my criticisms in ways that didn't feel combative, was all very good things to do. There's one nitpick, and nuclear people love to do this. It's the TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. ISFAC is that's probably 5 or 6, but yeah, they're not going to know those. So try to break it down get the jargon out of there if you can. But yeah, let's give Alyssa, Jim another round of applause. Nice seeing you. There we go. And we'll do time for just a couple of questions. We're a couple of minutes over here, but we'll get a couple of questions in.
It's kind of a theme here for a while. Democrat, Republican. Republicans are all about profit, and whatever. Democrats are all about environment. It's you guys kind of presented as so black and white, and I can't believe that it's your experience is that way in the legislative offices that much. Because Republicans surely care about the environment. They know the weather's bad. Maybe some aren't quite on board with the whole reason why, but they know it. So my question is, do you really run into it like at that amount of contrast in your visits to offices?
Hey, that's a very good point. And to your point, Democrats also care about jobs, 100%, and union jobs. So yeah, this is we're doing a short simulation. It's definitely a little bit of a simplification, but yeah, hopefully it's still helpful despite the approximation.
It's getting more complicated, the lines, and yeah, we find all types in our meetings, and that's why you have to gauge them with your questions and tailor your message. That might have been kind of an extreme over here and over here. A lot of times it's more complicated. You're right.
I get a lot of requests from climate organizations, and it's really hard to tell with some of them whether they're pro-nuclear or anti-nuclear. I've looked at the CCL website a number of times, and it's very hard to even find the word nuclear. I'm wondering what can be done to make that a little more obvious.
Mm-hmm. Later, because I'm a longtime CCL person. I will share with you that I started this nuclear action team within CCL. They were almost me do it because they thought the leadership thought that a lot of their members were anti-nuclear. There might have been some backlash. Well, we just did a poll recently, and of CCL members and chapter leaders, and the results were very surprising. It showed that 75 to 80% of the people were pro-nuclear, supportive of nuclear, and most of the rest were unsure or like no opinion. And there was only like 3% of the people were, anti-nuclear, strongly anti-nuclear. So hopefully the leadership will figure out that this is not something they have to be afraid of. Their membership is a lot more pro-nuclear than you think.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Anyway,
thank you so much for the question. And now we got to keep moving along. Awesome. Great questions.